in the voice. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to History Matters. And so does coffee, although I will confess I did not have time to make coffee this morning, so I'm drinking Fresca. History Matters, and so does Fresca. So today we are having an Anything Goes episode where we can talk about what folks would like to talk about. But before we get into that, and I will begin with a little tiny April Fool's thing, which I will explain when I get to it. But before we get to that, I turn to Grace, who will explain the rules of the game.
Hey, well, it's going to be a bit of the Wild West here this morning since anything goes.
I
Uh,
know,
but
scary.
welcome. I'm Grace Leatherman, the Executive Director of the National Council for History Education. We are thrilled to have you with us today. We're delighted that Joanne Freeman can once again be here to share with us her knowledge about history and relate it to the things that we all experience every day. So we're so glad that everyone can be here. Do participate in the chat. And please, if you have questions, and today is going to be heavily question based, I think, please put them in the Q&A so I can be sure to see them. The chat goes very fast and I don't want to miss anything. This is a history show, so make sure you ask some great history questions and of course keep it appropriate. But we're very excited to just kind of let's see where things go today. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Joanne.
Okay. So my brief April Fool's surprise. So I when I was desperately casting about trying to figure out what will we talk about, and I was trying to think. I mean, there are plenty of things that happened. There are always plenty of things that happen these days. I was trying to decide something that was topical, and then I thought, well, it is April Fool's, so maybe I could. There's something about that. You could talk about the origin of April Fool's Day, which it's a dangerous thing to look up the origin of April Fool's Day online because there are a lot of people who are really trying to weigh in and grab you for April Fool's Day. So I gave up on that. However, in the course of my casting about trying to figure out what to talk about, before I decided Anything Goes seems like the best way to go this week, I did find something that I must share with you, only because it made me laugh, and anything that makes us laugh these days, I think, is very important. So, in honor of April Fool's Day, apparently, on April Fool's Day 1991, the Smithsonian Museum of American History held a Jello conference, um, a, a, a mock-ish Jello conference, symposium, seminar. As Peter Liebold, a museum specialist in engineering history, put it, the Smithsonian Conference on Jello History was a semi-serious appraisal of the science of this substance with our tongues firmly planted in our cheeks. It included a morning seminar and a gel-off contest with appetizers, desserts, and main dishes brought in by the Smithsonian staff to be judged. For example, there was something called undescended Twinkies, which were Twinkies floating on orange Jello. I'm not even going to go into the explanation of that at all. There was tuna surprise, which was tuna fish and peas in aspic, which took a prize for bouquet and 1950s nostalgia. A tiered Jello rainbow cake received honors for, quote, the dessert your grandma would most like you to bring to her house. The judges said that they were judging entries based on level of disgust, and that can work either for or against you. Political correctness, I have no idea how to judge Jello based on political correctness. Jiggle, odor, and aesthetics, which includes color, shape, and suspension of foreign objects. A raspberry Jello chicken decorated with Jello eggs emerging from eggshells received not only an award for jiggle, but also first prize in the politically correct category, although it was also called politically incorrect. And we have a new category, one of the judges added, flammability, but so far none of the entries has shown any characteristic of that. In the wild card category were things like primordial aspic, a green ooze swimming with gummy worms and gummy fish, and a Jello brick nailed to a board called tougher than nailing Jello to the wall. Jello is a real American science, Stephen Lubar, curator of the museum's engineering and industry division, said. One thing museums are good at is taking insignificant things and explaining culture through them, which that's a fine statement there. I will close by simply saying that someone at this mock Smithsonian conference on Jell-O history did track the origin of vodka Jell-O cubes. For those of you who are wondering, and I know on April Fool's Day, you truly are wondering. Through oral histories, he traced the origins of the cubes known as Jell-O shots to the early 1980s and a high school in Northern California, which somehow makes sense, actually, Northern California particularly. The morning seminar included lectures with slides dealing with subjects as Jell-O and Jack Benny, Jell-O as technological system, and white religious cults, lime Jell-O and little marshmallows, a topic chosen by Raina Green of the Native American Indian program. Okay, that is my ridiculous April Fool's treat for you, which I stumbled across in desperately trying to find something to talk about. And then I thought it was an April Fool's thing, but I tracked it, right? I did what we all do as good historians, was like cast about and found it in the New York Times the day after it happened. However, who knew the Smithsonian had a Jell-O conference on April Fool's Day, showing you that even government museums can have a sense of humor. I salute that too. I salute that. Okay, now we are moving into the anything goes portion. As I said, slightly daunting. I don't know where we're going, but let's see where we go.
Well, that was perfectly charming, and I think we should definitely add an element to our next NCAG conference when we can all be in person. This is definitely something to think about, or at least we'll have a staff Jell-O challenge when we can all be together.
Jell-O, man, the eternal Jell-O. One last question, actually. Does anyone remember there was like Jell-O 1, 2, 3 had like layers? I want to say that's from the 70s, maybe.
Like
yes.
One box, 3 layers?
Yes. And the layers were like slightly different density. Okay, there are some people remembering this, so I did not hallucinate and create this. And it right. Okay, so thank you people for saying yes. 80s. Okay, so it was 80s. Yes, it looked pretty, but it was still Jell-O. Anyway, okay.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah.
You have learned something this morning.
Now
Greg.
I have made layered Jell-O. That would have been so much easier. So
it would have.
All right. Well, we do have some questions rolling in, and please keep them coming. Oh, Tim is now Tim is famous for his research rabbit holes, and he is now going to get on Jell-O. So thank you, Tim. It's important.
I asked for that. I did.
Yep. So we have lots of questions. This is exciting. Thank you all. Please keep it coming. So, well, let's start with the obvious question. It is April Fool's Day. Were there in early America, do we know of any pranksters?
So I went there and thinking about this episode. Right? First, I looked up April Fool's Early America, and then I thought, okay, that didn't serve me really well. So then I thought, okay, sort of pranks or didn't help me much. Then I thought humor. I could find humor in the early Republic, but the humor that I could think of was, first of all, I partly discussed some of it before, but I could not come up with good April Fool's jokes or material, which does not mean it wasn't there, but it was not in the whatever portion of my brain April Fool's pranks should be in. I did not have any for early America. I would find it hard to believe that there were not any, and as far as I could tell from my very quick and quick and dirty research on April Fools, it goes back certainly long before, or at least somewhat before. I could sit here and talk to you about the 500,000 theories about where April Fool's Day comes from, but in one way or another, it's probably like the 16th century, maybe.
Oh, wow.
I know, like I think in 1588, there's a book that talks about it, which I'm really pulling out of the surface of my brain since I read it once. But at any rate, it does. And some people claim it goes back to the Romans. And in those cases, I'm truly not sure. And that has something to do with a calendar change. Anyway, clearly I did the research. I was just not fully persuaded by any of it. So I gave up. But that's a long way of saying, I don't know of April Fool's pranks. And I must believe that there were some. And so I feel quite disappointed in myself, because you would think that would be a thing that I would have quick on the top of my brain, at the tip of my tongue, and I do not. And I even looked. So I'm going to have to, I feel like I failed somehow as your historian with a true sense of humor. But I don't know of any.
All right. Well, I think we would take at this any prank in history. So I'll put it all out to you all. Those of you who are quick with your research. If anyone finds a historical prank to tell us about, I think that you get double bonus points for today.
But it has to be a
Oh,
prank and not just a joke, right? Like a prank meaning not just a did you hear the one
like
about?
I don't know, putting a whoopee cushion on someone's congressional seat.
I would be good with that as an
That'd be
answer.
great.
Yes. I don't know any congressional whoopee cushions, but yes.
Tim, if you could get on that, that would be great.
You guys are
All right.
such ace researchers that you
Yeah,
know.
it's fun.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, so on the same note, Dale says, trailer for the April 4th and 5th PBS Franklin program, one of the historians states that Franklin was the only founding father who has a sense of humor. True?
Oh, ooh, no, no. Although, I mean, sense of humor can have many meanings. I would say, judging it by our terms, John Adams. John Adams had it. He also could be very, not quite pompous, but he could be self-deprecating, and when he was, it's typically he had a great sense of humor about it. I mean, I think I've quoted before the one letter he signs to Thomas Jefferson in which he signs it 80 years of age and too fat to last much longer. I mean, come on. Benjamin Franklin has a classic kind of, you know, quips and putting things in print kind of a sense of humor. Adams is more kind of off the cuff, and he's not always sort of like obvious with Adams, but he definitely, I mean, just that signature all by itself. I don't know if anyone else, maybe Franklin would have signed a letter that way, but there's nobody else. Like, there's no way Washington or Hamilton or Madison would sign a letter that way, or heaven forbid Jefferson. So my long answer to a short question, he is not the only one, but now I'm wondering who said it. Do you know?
Oh, interesting. All right, more research.
Because I probably know them. And I know that I know two, Ellen Cohn and I can't remember now. I know two or three of the historians in it. So I will be very curious if anybody finds that to tell me, because I will have to ask them. I will have to confront them. Truly, I mean, my April Fool's email to them.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm trying to decide if we should stick with April Fools or move along here.
That's right. The pressure's on you, Grace, to like pick.
I know this is when you said that yesterday, I was like, oh, this is gonna be hard. Okay. Okay. Well, getting serious here. Since we're all concerned about the economy and inflation in present, what was the economic situation in the 1850s or roughly before the Civil War?
Wow. Well, I mean, at that particular moment, the economic situation in a specific way was, I would say, was not at the forefront of people's minds. But that said, slavery was, right? And that is, for many people, fundamentally was a question of not just economics, but what the different sections of the country, the relative power that each would have regarding the other, at slavery having a lot to do with that. So I don't think that the nation at that point was in a deep economic crisis, although I will say that between the very beginning of the 19th century, moving straight ahead through, there was a series of crashes of various sorts, financial crises again and again and again and again. And I don't have the specific years at my fingertips, and I would be really impressive if I could be like 1811, 1815, 1822, but there were many of them. So my saying that everyone wasn't absolutely focused on the economy at that particular moment doesn't mean that people weren't worried about it, but it wasn't, I think, a particular crisis moment right before the Civil War. You know, people were focused on Kansas and Nebraska in the middle of the 1850s. And then, you know, from Kansas, Nebraska on with popular sovereignty, those years were really very slavery centric, because people quickly realized it was the issue that, you know, all that they had been trying to compromise, a series of compromises over the course of the first half of the 19th century. The Kansas-Nebraska mess sort of removed the possibility of compromise. It seemed to backtrack on all the compromises, and then it was sort of not good things were going to happen. So that was really where the focus of attention was at the time.
Thank you
Here we
very
go.
much.
Wait, 1957 panic just appeared. Okay, I have to open chat.
Yeah, this might be one for a.
I think this one. Yes, there we go. Richard says the 1857 panic had a big impact. I could totally believe that. I take that as I see Fesca, not Fresca, and I'm not even going to go there. But I could totally believe that the panic of 1857, among the 100,000,000 panics, could have inflamed the sectional tensions that were really at the peak of everything at that moment. So thank you, Richard.
All right, and this has been a big deal for you this week. Of course, there was an incident at the Oscars, which you analyzed in light of your historical experience, Joanne, on Twitter, and then it made its way into the press. So congratulations on that. So I think we got several questions about it. So were there, with this incident, what were your thoughts about it? Does it elucidate things about honor culture? Someone asks here, which of your books ties in better to understanding this incident? What are your thoughts as a historian of honor culture here?
Wow. Okay. Which of my books? I would say this one, the most recent one, Field of Blood, because some of what was going on in that book, some of the slapping, hitting, punching, pushing that was going on, partly was to have an impact on the politics of the floor in the House and Senate, and partly was so people would see it and that it would humiliate or embarrass or have an impact with constituents and with the larger country on whoever was under attack. So I would say Field of Blood at least touches on that phenomenon of someone doing something deliberately in front of an audience to have the impact that would have. That said, that I was watching the Oscars, half watching the Oscars with I don't know, some people were probably very tuned in, and saw that moment and responded like everyone else did, right? Which was like, wait, did I just see that? Like, did that? And then immediately all these people on Twitter were like, Joanne Freeman will now explain what just happened. And my main response was just, honor culture, speaking generally, right? Honor culture is partly about performing something to prove or disprove honor, to prove your honor, to disprove someone else's honor. And had what was actually a slap, had it been a punch, would have been more like initiating a fight, right? I mean, it would have been, both of them are displays of anger, but if there had been a punch, that would have been like a flare of anger or outrage. The slap, I said, was like an exclamation. It was like a statement. It was kind of a, you've dishonored me, kind of a undertow of that kind of a gesture that was different than had it been a punch. And that very much is in line with the kind of general way that honor culture works. That sometimes what you're doing is just deliberately trying to show your bravery and that you're willing to be outraged about something and that you're willing to stand up for it, and that this person deserves nothing better than a slap across the face. So it's supposed to be a little bit humiliating. That was the point of it. So that was basically what I said. What I didn't mean to say necessarily was my understanding of honor culture in 1830, it immediately and directly transfers to whatever goes on now. And some people, because it's Twitter, immediately were like, but that's from, the 19th century. It's like, yeah, I know. But I do actually still stand by the fact that a slap and a punch are two different things. And a slap has a more, not quite ritualistic isn't quite the right word, but has a more complicated meaning to it than a punch. Someone on Twitter came up to me, responded and said something like, yeah, you try slapping somebody when you leave a bar and see if they don't think of that as starting a fight. I was like, okay, I'm not going to be slapping anybody. I'm not talking about leaving a bar, but okay, people responded with a great deal of emotion in that moment when people were surprised. But honor culture, it really is about defending your reputation, your honor, in many cases, manliness, and taking down the reputation and manliness of the person who has insulted you in some way. So in that sense, what we saw was a very classical moment of honor culture being acted out. And that's all I said. I wasn't going to say anything else because, of course, then there became a great social media fight, not only about the moment, but about how people were commenting on the moment, right? It became, as the kids say, meta, right? It was like, we're commenting on the comments. I didn't want any part of that. But the fact that, I'm always, and this is true in politics, and it was true in obviously popular culture, when people act out something that so clearly stems from something historical, and particularly something that I study, it's fascinating, right? Because that was modern. That was a now moment that grew from all of these things that I've written about that are hundreds of years old. So I, purely historian brain, right? My historian brain kicked in, and historian brain was amazed and interested in what I saw, apart from regular person brain that was a little shocked at what transpired on TV. What if he slapped him with a glove? Actually, so several people said, but there was no glove. That's actually a very good question. So the glove thing, maybe it's European, I don't know. It was Americans did not do the glove slapping thing. So as far as I know, movies like the glove slapping thing. And the other thing that movies do with duels is they have people stand with their backs and then pace away from each other and spin. That's also not really what happened in duels. There's one duel I found in like 1802 in which that did happen, and bad things happened. And the person who, the 2 seconds who agreed to that, their principals, the two people dueling against each other, their response was like, what? Like, how could you, what kind of nonsense, right? You're supposed to like stand a certain distance apart and then face each other. And then someone says, usually 1, 2, 3, present. And then you can fire, and then they say 1, 2, 3, something else again, because you have a window through which you can fire. And then after a certain count, you can no longer fire. But what that means is if they say 1, 2, 3, present, and one person fires and one doesn't, then the person who fired has to stand there and wait a certain number of seconds for the other person to decide what they're going to do. And in some cases, people were just shot dead in that moment, right? That like, I think, not surprisingly, there's an Andrew Jackson duel in which he was shot, like 1, 2, 3%, and he was shot, and he stood there, and the guy who shot him had to stand there, and was shot and I believe killed. So yeah, I see Grace is wincing, and properly wincing at this. But at any rate, it's partly the performance of it that matters, and the ability of people to interpret it, right? So nowadays we clearly are not really totally in tune with honor culture, given the ways in which everybody was responding. In 1800 or 1820 or 1790, people would have understood the subtleties of whatever was going on in that moment. I see you guys are all like, it's all over, even on chat. Yeah.
And it's of course always wonderful when history can illuminate the important issues of the day. Thank you, Joanne. We have, again, sort of swinging back and forth the types of questions here. Okay. Did the founders consider a parliamentary democracy system, or was it too closely tied to the existing British government?
As opposed to, you mean House of, I mean, when you say parliamentary system, I wonder what that question is aiming at.
There's just a note that this is from a Canadian perspective.
From a Canadian perspective. I mean, what I can say is that the founders did very much have their legislative culture and assumptions and political understandings were grounded on the British system, since that was theirs. And in a sense, by creating the House and the Senate, wasn't quite House of Commons, House of Lords, but there was talk at the beginning, and some people wanted very much the Senate to be a kind of House of Lords. And there was, if I remember correctly, a flare-up in which some senators insisted that when people in the House referred to people in the Senate, they should always refer to them as your honorable or some such thing, that they should have a title attached to show that they were the higher house, the superior house. And of course, this caused a big ruckus, and some people were like, well, if you demand that, I'm not going to address you at all. And it became a big deal. So I guess part of my answer to that question would be Americans, in designing our constitutional system, and particularly in acting it out in those early years, were always caught between wanting to create something American and small r Republican, born of a democratic republic and not monarchical on the one hand. And on the other hand, all of their understanding of dignity and authority and gravitas in government came from the British background, their pride in the British system of government. So they were always kind of trying to find a middle ground. And that was hard. I mean, this is sort of the some of the improvisational stuff that I always find fascinating when I study this time period is they're trying to make things up, and you can see them doing that, and you can see the wheels spinning, right? And you can see them trying to pull from the past and yet tweak it enough so that it doesn't seem British and monarchical. And yet it's fascinating in this period because it's so front and center so often in the politics of that moment. Oh, I cannot hear you.
I'm muted.
Oh, okay.
Matthew wants to know, what is the most surprising thing you have? I think you've talked about objects, so I'm just gonna. What is the most surprising thing you've ever read in the archives?
Ooh, okay. The most surprising thing I've ever read. That's tricky. Yeah, objects. I could talk about hairballs and any number of them. Wow. The most surprising thing I have read. Well, it's not. I might have already talked about this. It's not the most. But did I talk about John Quincy Adams's letter about his father becoming president?
Mm-hmm.
That stands out for me only because I assumed what I would find, which is probably what many of you would assume, which is so for those who don't know that story, I was tracking something else in the Adams family papers, and I started seeing it in 1796, I guess, or the election of 1796. And I kept finding these letters from John Quincy Adams, who was in Europe at the time, trying to get news about who had won the election. And I got distracted, of course, from what I was supposed to be doing. And instead, I started following the trail of John Quincy Adams because I wanted to see what would happen when he found out. And I assumed that there would be some, it's a fine day for America. My father would be a great president. And so I was entirely surprised when I found that letter. And instead, John Quincy Adams said something, this is a bad paraphrase, but essentially said, oh, now I'm going to have to be president. Like, he immediately assumed that because his father had become president, he was going to expect of his son, you can do this too. This is now part of your bucket list, John Quincy. Like, here you go. That surprised me. That I really did not expect to find that, which is why it's been many, many years since I found that. And it stuck with me because of that. And sometimes, it's the way something looks that surprises you, not necessarily what it says. So there was again, I probably have mentioned this already, but I'm going to say it again anyway. When Adams loses the election of 1800, he writes a letter, a sad letter. Actually, he's not sure he is losing, but it's not officially over. I should say that, the contest, but he's probably not going to be president. And he writes a letter to Abigail, and it starts out, it's very kind of dark, and he's like, this is ugly. Like, this is like the evening of my soul, and I'm sitting here in the dark, and I'm thinking about the fact that, I have not won re-election to the presidency, and it's very sad. And then he says something along the lines of, I am almost able to say without emotion, Thomas Jefferson, President of the United States. But when, in the way he writes it, he says, I am almost able to say without emotion, Thomas Jefferson. Like, his handwriting is huge. It's like, yeah, no, you're really not able to say that. You can't even write it, John. That made me laugh out loud when I saw that. And there's a case in which that would not come across in the transcript of that. Very much looking at it, you can see that he's not having an easy time making that statement. So that stuck with me too.
Have you ever found things that changed the direction of your research? Maybe you thought you were going to be arguing one thing and you found a document that took you in a different direction?
my instant answer would be to say, yes, of course. But now I have to think of a specific example. Well, I mean, I can remember a very specific incident that shaped the way I was writing the last chapter of my first book, which was about the election of 1800. And I spent a lot of time at the Library of Congress researching on it. And I guess at that point, I was in grad school still. And I think I drove up to Washington and stayed a night or two and then drove back to Charlottesville. And so as I was going back, I was kind of panicking because I was like, what did I see? Like, what did I see? I took a lot of notes. I don't know what I'm going to say. And I tried to think about what I had seen in some way that would make me understand what the heck I was going to say in this last chapter. And I couldn't think about what I had seen. And I kept asking myself. And then I asked this key question: what did I not see? Like, did I not see something that I expected to see? And I realized, yeah, discussion of any policy or issues, it was all personal. It was all, well, he's going to do this and he's going to do that, and you should talk to these people. It was machinations and politicking and who's talking to who. And I did not see like, well, the Federalists this time are going to be really focused on this issue. They weren't focused on issues. And that was a big understanding, right? That was a light bulb moment where it was like, oh, wait a minute. We're not looking at like modern parties and that have campaign, platforms and policies that they run behind. That's not what I saw. This is not a modern election. This is something very different. And then I started to think about other things that I had seen, like various people swearing oaths of honor that they would support both candidates on a ticket, even though they didn't want to, and all of the ways in which it seems modern, but really wasn't modern. And there's some horrible drilling noise that just started.
I was wondering which of our ends that was on. Good to know.
That's me. Thank you so much. Anyway, so that was big because that suddenly made me rethink what an election meant in this period, and that I couldn't assume things that I assumed about elections based on, modern sensibilities.
Thank you very much. We have all kinds of things in the questions. Miranda is proposing duels between various figures and suggesting that NCHE make this pay-per-view. Fund us forever, she says.
So the argument in favor of dueling, one of them was that if you're afraid you might get shot for something you say, you're going to be really careful about what you say, right? That was one of the arguments. Was it's good because people behave better. And when Southerners, when the Southerners seceded from the Union and they were no longer in Congress, there was definitely the level of anger and bad language went way up, right? So in a sense, it proved it true that the Southerners left, and then suddenly everybody else was like, and another thing, it was like, you're not going to shoot me, so I can say whatever I want. But that was part of the logic of it, is that sort of counterintuitively, but logically, it dueling makes people behave out of just fear of what happens if they don't.
Fascinating. All right. So again, we're all over the place today, but obviously we're hearing about altered call logs, which makes one think back to Nixon. And Kay's wondering if there are any other times in history when she says presidents, but I'd make that any politician have hidden records and it's come to light. Or
Yes.
if there have been great.
Well, yes. So, and as a matter of fact, someone's getting bingo. As a matter of fact, what a recent episode of Now and Then, my podcast, like I'm telling you, people are checking off the bingo card, that I do with Heather Cox Richardson. We talked about secrets. We were talking about, in that case, 13 boxes or however many boxes of government documents that were taken from the White House to Mar-a-Lago, and what was in them, and that there were all kinds of confidential information that shouldn't have traveled that way. And so the episode was just about what is that? So what is that? How do we deal with secrecy, and why is secrecy important, and what happens when secrecy is violated, and what are the things that go into those kinds of decisions? So, it's an interesting bind of sorts, right? Because on the one hand, in any kind of government, you would assume there are things, particularly between foreign nations, your country and a foreign country, that should be certainly not available to everybody, that there are things that need to remain confidential, that there are things that shouldn't be made public. On the flip side of that, of course, is the sort of small r Republican faith in and desire for transparency, right? We deserve to know what's happening in government. We put you in office. We deserve to know what's there. And as in so many other aspects of politics everywhere in American politics, right? That's a line you have to walk. And we talked about this is the episode in which I ridiculously sang the song about John Adams and the Quasi-War. But we talked about that, the XYZ affair and the documents, whether they should be public or not, and what happened when they were made public and the debate over that. So yeah, there are times when things are public, but this, as in so many things in history, this is a matter of context, right? So, and it's a matter of detail. So on the one hand, you can say, wow, there's 7 hours missing from these records. And it's records of a key moment in a key day when a key thing happened that appears to have been a crime that suggests someone destroyed them. That's different from saying those 7 hours are secret and shouldn't be seen, right? That's a different thing. And you might say that a government body could look at them and determine whether they should be secret or not. That's actually way more above board than, there's no record at all, right? That's a case in which you're not even talking about transparency necessarily. You're talking about accountability. And you're talking about the fact that if you're in office, you're accountable for what you do. The record of what you've done and how you've done it and who gets to see that record might be something that deserves debate. But the fact that there is a complete record, that's not up for debate. So that's part of, remarkably, to me, and some of you might feel differently, I think there's a remarkably small amount of focus being paid on this rather enormous suggestion, right? That in the records of what happened that day, there's 7 hours that aren't accounted for in records. Seems like, you mentioned Watergate, seems like a pretty big deal. And it seems like, we're talking about the slap and we're talking about any number of other things. And to me, this is like, hello, like it's, we don't yet fully know what it means or what's happened with it, but that does not mean we should not actually be investigating it, thinking about it, asking questions about it, talking about it. And as with so many other things, our news cycles last, approximately a nanosecond, and then we move on to something else. So that's to me, it's missing time, not secret time, that is the problem in this particular case.
Thank you. Dale would like to note, going back, that Stacy Schiff was the one who made the comment about Franklin's sense of humor.
Okay.
She is the author of A Great Improvisation, Franklin, France, and the Birth of America.
Excellent. Okay, it's good to know.
Thank you, Dale. Good to know.
Yes. Someone is telling Ryan to put something into the Q&A. Oh, there we go. Through a historical lens, do you think we will be able to return to a respectful view of our country and presidency? Will the parties ever actually work together again, as they have in the past, without trying to just block legislation and disparage the other side? Will we ever get back to supporting the president in our foreign affairs? Okay, so historian brain. Historian brain says few things are absolutely permanent in the long view, right? So if you were asking me will we ever have a moment in the future? Will we ever get back to being able to engage in respectful debate? Will we ever trust institutions of national government? Will we ever? There's a lot of will we evers that we could ask. The short answer I would say is, well, yes, because I would be more willing to believe that than I would that like nothing will ever change and we'll be stuck right where we are now forever. Nothing stays that way, right? That kind of stasis is usually not how history works. Now, time scales and time frames, I have no idea, right? So who knows if it will be 50 years or 20 years or 5 years, doubtful. But at any rate, who knows how long it'll take for the culture of politics to shift in the United States, but it will. And someone else is going to get bingo. Contingency, right? This is part of the importance of the whole concept of contingency, which is things will change. Will they get better or worse? Will we be more respectful and more functional? as a country and in the way that we deal with our government or less? I do not know, right? Well, will we recognize and bolster democracy and put up some more guardrails so that some things that maybe used to be norms, there's at least a little bit of a guardrail so that they can't be as easily violated? Maybe. Or maybe for a while we're going to go in a different direction and democracy will not be bolstered and instead will back away from it in some ways. If we do that, will that be permanent? I would say, again, as a historian, probably not, but that's easy to say, and there could be a long period of time when it's around. So it's impossible to say, which is why I started doing this in the first place, right? Which is why this moment is important, because things haven't been decided. We really are at a moment where you can act and change how things are happening. You can act as a group, you can speak up, you can do things in this moment, or try to do things in this moment, have a voice, have an opinion, and act in ways that can have a positive impact. And that's much better, even if you feel like, what are the odds it'll have any impact? That's better than saying it won't have any impact. I'm just, whatever happens, happens. That's really not the way to go. And that's, I think I did talk about this in the recent past, was the people who responded to my tweet about democracy. I tweeted out something that said, I don't think Americans realize what they lose when they lose democracy. And a bunch of people on the right said, what's democracy doing for us anyway? We don't need democracy. And then a bunch of people on the left said, we've never had democracy, real democracy. So does it actually really work? And that on both sides alarmed the heck out of me, right? On both sides, they were basically saying, oh, whatever, who cares about democracy? I do, and a lot of other people do too. But that's kind of behavior of whatever, that's surrender. And this is not a surrender moment by far. And that's why a lot of people, including me, are pontificating all the time on these kinds of issues, because it matters so much. And because I profoundly believe that public opinion matters, and that an engaged and active populace can have an impact. If they are coordinated, if they organize, if they work together in some way, it can have an impact. Yet last night I went to, there was a Preet Bharara had a Stay Tuned Live event at the town hall in New York City, and he had a number of different guests there. And for a certain portion of it, they were talking about Russia and Ukraine, and Ukraine. And it was interesting because the conversation went right in this direction, right? What will happen, what might happen, if something does happen, and how long will it take to happen? And it was interesting because it was right along the lines of what we're talking about here. And part of the answer was the Ukrainian people are standing up and are fighting and are resisting in a way that matters enormously, right? So if you want to see people fighting for freedom, and I'm not saying we all need to be like fighting, but I am saying those are people who saw the moment and are responding to the moment in a way that matters profoundly. And we're watching it, right? And the world is watching it, and the world is responding. And there was a part of this discussion was about Putin in this space of the world watching, and what happens to dictators when they either make poor decisions or they lose the faith of others. How does that work? It's a historical conversation, as a matter of fact. So.
Right. Thank you very much. James notes that you've talked about, well, I'm adding to this, but you've talked lately about outrage and how there's a tendency for politicians to be bombastic and extreme as a way of eliciting emotion, and this is a way of achieving power or other ends, and that can be very effective. But James notes that recently there have been people who have gone too far in being bombastic and start to become a bit of a liability for their allies. He wonders if you can give us any juicy tidbits from early America or pre-Civil War, where people who were being effective with being extreme may have taken it too far and become a bit of a liability.
Well, I mean, I think I'm trying to think of a specific example. The short answer, the non-specific example is yeah, like that kind of thing happens all the time. The interesting question then is, what do people do about it, or do they do something about it? Recently, the all of the things that have happened, and there's been nothing done, and then one thing that happens, and I'm not going to go into the details to avoid being political, but the things that people choose to be truly offended by and to act out on, like this is really bad. That tells you something about the different values that people have. Yeah, there have been moments when people have gone too far or said something too much and gotten in trouble for it. When I was writing my book, actually, Henry Wise was a great example of that. He would always stand up and he would say something like, all of you were drunk last week in here. Like a lot of you were drunk in here last week. And someone else will, say, you're not supposed to say that sort of thing on the floor, right? Like just stop, right? So, and as a historian, I'm like happy he said it and happy that someone scolded him for saying it, which means it's probably true. So there are all kinds of things that happen along those lines. The question then is, as I was just suggesting, what's the response, or is there a response? Sometimes the response is just lying. Right? Someone says something and it's really a liability. And then someone else stands up and says that never happened. This happened to me all the time in researching that book. Someone else, and particularly in Congress, someone says something in Congress, someone else stands up and says, well, that's not true. That never happened here, right? And all of these people say, right, it never happened here. And I'm left, even with databases in the distance of time, I don't know if the thing happened or if the thing was said. So yeah, there are all kinds of liabilities, and then there are all kinds of sneaky ways or lies or other ways in which you can manipulate the press or play to the public that kind of either smooths it over or obscures it or complicates it so much that the liability becomes less of a liability because you become a little unsure about it. And we are, in the midst of an extreme moment along those lines when there are so many ways in which you can recreate, uncreate, mask, hide, fake, everything. Evidence itself is problematic now that it becomes harder to have an immediate judgment about something that seems like a liability, even if it's a really obvious one, right? And I'm sure many of you experience this too. I do. I'll see something on Twitter, and this is what I say every week, right? I see something on Twitter, it gets me really angry, and then I have to pause, like I always tell you too, like don't get really angry, because they want you to get angry, number one, and number two, is it actually real? Like, did this really happen? And I spend a lot of time poking around, and sometimes I will prove to myself it didn't happen. Sometimes I'm not sure, and then I won't write about it, right? I don't know if it's true or not. And I just think, I'm a historian. I do this for a living. And I have all kinds of databases and ways in which I can check things, and through Yale, even more extra bonus databases of things. And if I have a hard time sometimes figuring this out, it's no wonder that that's part of the crisis of the moment. I think about being, an early American historian. You have a limited amount of evidence. There's a lot of evidence, but it's a limited amount of evidence. And when I began writing about the 1840s and 1850s, and there was so much more evidence, just like, more paper, more evidence, more newspapers, more everything, right? Telegraph, and then more. And I remember feeling like, whoa, like it was like cosmically more for me to deal with. I can't imagine being a historian of the 20th or 21st century. I just can't. There's too much evidence. And then I think back to people, who study ancient Rome or ancient Greece and have a very limited number of source materials that they can deal with. And I'm sure there are people who are 20th century historians who look back and they're like, whoa, how do you do that? You have like eight documents that you deal with about any one thing. How can you? So that all by itself is interesting, even above and beyond the specific issue that we're talking about. There are people screaming mug, mug, mug.
Oh, yes.
We're just about over. I missed what you just said.
Oh, I suppose you better show us your mug then.
I guess so. If the mug, mug, mug is coming. Okay. So this will be very logical. And if there's anyone here who is new, I will say, as I often do, that every week, this is the 104th straight episode, every week there is a mug that in some way or another has something to do with the topic under debate. This is going to be a very logical one. It's the anything goes mug. The many brains.
We just tapped into all your brains with those questions.
I pretty much all of my brains, every single one. Non-historian citizen brain, historian brain, popular culture brain, fresco brain.
You got it. Check.
Fresco brain. All of the brains. Founder's brain, quote brain. I just noticed looking at this for the first time, there's a Thomas Jefferson quote. I didn't realize, Carolee, that you put that here. I once offered people a quote from Thomas Jefferson that you can use. It will have many purposes in your life and you will always remember it. And so if you want to quote a founder, this is a great one to use. That Jefferson at one point was complaining in old age about how much time he spent responding to letters from people who he didn't know, asking him about, like, tell us about the writing of the Declaration, tell us about, and that he felt some responsibility to respond to these letters, but it took hours and hours every day. And so in this one letter, when he was complaining about it, he said, quote, "Is this life?" I love that. But we would say that, right? So I did not know that "is this life" it's actually in my brain. I thank you for that very much. But at any rate, that is the purpose of this Anything Goes episode. And I appreciate the range of the questions, and I appreciate the fact that we didn't get pulled too far down the rabbit hole of the slap, that we talked about it as historians and then we moved on. Okay, look, oh, interesting. So people are calling for mug because normally the mug is called for at 10:36, 10:37, yes. And I stopped talking. So I was thrown off too. I was like, why are we calling for the mug now? It's like, oh yeah, because actually we're just about over. But
yep.
So if that was an April Fool's ploy to get me to focus on the mug, it worked. Because I was totally discombobulated.
And I figured, Joanne, we're kind of doing some improv here this morning.
We're totally
you are literally live from New York, so I've got Manhattan behind me, circa 1975 to throw folks off.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And yet anything goes.
Yeah.
Excellent. It's excellent. It's actually quite a nice image.
It's nice, isn't it? Yeah. Guess where I got it?
I wonder. Okay, so I see some people are needing to leave, probably because they're OAH. However, I will say, as I always say, pardon me, that we will now segue from this History Matters episode to the after party. What that means is that we will no longer be recording. We will continue the conversation, or any conversation, because we won't be recording. We can be a little freer and easier about what we discuss. If you have beamed in through the NCHE website, just stay right where you are. Someone else is now going to get bingo, and poof, you will instantly be in the after party. If you are joining us on Facebook, then you need to leave Facebook and join us through ncheteach.org/conversations, and then you will be part of the after party too. And I will say, and Grace, you and I will have to talk about this. I realized this morning in planning this episode, next Friday morning, I will be speaking at a high school, which is good because I'll be speaking at a school. However, it means I won't be here. So you and I, Grace, need to talk about what we can do so that we will have something available, but it means that I will not be part of the conversation next Friday morning, which I deeply apologize for. Normally Fridays or mornings are off limits. But I didn't really focus on this being Friday morning until they were buying train tickets. So, and then suddenly it was like, uh-oh. So anyway, so
you
next
did 104 in a row, which is quite something. And I think all of us think that is amazing.
Well, there will be an episode. There will be an episode. So there will be.
Okay, great. Let's do this.
I'm not going to give up the streak. It's going to be 105.
Fantastic.
But it won't be me existing at that special moment in time. So anyway, someone got triple bingo. I knew it. At any rate, so I hope you guys will all beam in. I'm assuming that even when I'm not there, some of you guys come and maybe at the same time and watch it. I have no idea. Actually, I can just fondly think that to myself. But at any rate, thank you, as always, for coming, for engaging in democracy on a Friday morning, talking about what needs to be talked about, and engaging in public affairs, linking the past and the present. I hope you all have a really wonderful week. And I guess I will officially see you chatting with me in 2 weeks. But I will totally be trying to keep up with people, and probably on the train coming back from the high school on Friday afternoon, I will trying to be catching up on Twitter and seeing if people watch the episode. And by then I'll clearly know what I'm going to talk about, which I don't know now. So, okay. At that, I'm going to turn things back to you, Grace, and we can join each other and segue into the after party.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much for being here. If you enjoyed this, please check out our other offerings at ncheteach.org, become a member, check out our professional learning opportunities this summer, take a look at Joanne's back episodes, and there will be some kind of material for you next week, and we'll see you live in 2 weeks. Thank you all very much.
Okay, I see all kinds of technical